All right. Begin with oil prices. Brent crude flirting with $70 a barrel. West Texas Intermediate, I think this is a 4-month high for oil prices that have been depressed, closing out 2025. Venezuela is in the news again. So is Iran, with President Trump threatening Iran to bring them to the table for a nuclear deal. Also on Venezuela, here is Marco Rubio, U.S. Secretary of State, testifying in Congress yesterday about plans to manage financing for Venezuela using sanctioned oil. Let's take a listen.
And one of the tools that's available to us is the fact that we have sanctions on oil. There is oil that is sanctioned that cannot move from Venezuela because of our quarantine. And so what we did is we entered into an arrangement with them. And the arrangement is this: on the oil that is sanctioned in quarantine, we will allow you to move it to market. We will allow you to move it to market at market prices, not at the discount China was getting. In return, the funds from that will be deposited into an account that we will have oversight over. And you will spend that money for the benefit of the Venezuelan people. Why was that important? Venezuela was running out of storage capacity. Okay, they were producing oil, they were drilling oil, they had nowhere to put it. They had nowhere to move it, and they were facing a fiscal crunch. They needed money in the immediacy to fund the police officer, the sanitation workers, the daily operations of government. And so we've been able to create a short-term mechanism. This is not going to be the permanent mechanism, but this is a short-term mechanism in which the needs of the Venezuelan people can be met through a process that we've created, where they will submit every month a budget of this is what we need funded. We will provide for them at the front end what that money cannot be used for. And they've been very cooperative in this regard. In fact, they have pledged to use a substantial amount of those funds to purchase medicine and equipment directly from the United States. As in fact, one of the things they need is dilutin, depending how you want to pronounce it. And that basically is the light crude that you need to mix with their heavy crude in order for the oil to be able to be mixed and moved. They used to get 100% of that from Russia. They are now getting 100% of that from the United States.
All right, let's talk to Dr. Carole Nakhle, who, of course, is the CEO of Crystol Energy, joining us to discuss the latest in the oil markets. Dr. Nakhle, Happy New Year to you. Great to see you. I wanted to get your thoughts on the U.S. Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, and the plans for Venezuela. What do you make of it?
Well, definitely. The U.S. approach today to Venezuela, what they are telling us they want to do is to help with the Venezuelan people. And of course, if the sanctions are lifted on some of the barrels that Venezuela is producing and wants to export, that would help in generating revenues that Venezuela can use to spend domestically and help the Venezuelan people, right? So this is a kind of headline message that we are getting from the White House. However, I wish things were as simple, because if you look at throughout history for countries, especially countries like Venezuela, which rank in the bottom on the performance when it comes to the institutional framework, the worst in terms of corruption management, the worst in the rule of law out of 143 countries. So because of that poor legislative and institutional framework that is in the country, it would be extremely naive to believe that even with American oversight of the main source of revenue for the Venezuelan government that is coming from oil, that it's going to be spent properly within the country for the benefits of the people. I think this is the missing link, because there is a difference between the statement and the realities on the ground. And unfortunately, what we have in Venezuela is not pleasant at all when it comes to how the oil revenues have been managed throughout the years, and whether the average Venezuelan person in the street is really benefiting from that, or it's just the elite that is in power or running few businesses in the country.
You make a strong point, and so let me piggyback off of that. What do you make of this plan to reform the oil and gas sector in Venezuela? We understand there's something going through the National Assembly. They want to reduce the control of the states, particularly for upstream operations. What's your sense of that? The attempt to reform the oil and gas sector there?
You know, this is a subject that is very close to my heart, because for almost 30 years I've been looking after these kind of policy reforms in countries all around the world. And I can tell you with great certainty and great confidence that such reforms, especially in a country that has been producing oil for many, many decades and yet mismanaged the oil sector, reforms are unlikely to be completed overnight. This is a long-term process, and it's a very complex process. The intentions are there. It's good. It's great that they are reforming their sector. It's good that they want to to bring in more investment. But again, what happens throughout? What is the ripple effect throughout the economy? You have all sorts of legislations, all sorts of policies that need to be updated. Skills, the administrative capacity in ministries also needs to be seriously updated. You cannot suddenly take somebody with almost no skills and no knowledge to transform them into a proficient person in these matters within weeks. This is a very long-term process. So we should be realistic in terms of our expectations. It's good that they started the process, but I really doubt it's going to be a massive transformation overnight. And let's not look far away from Venezuela. Look at Iraq. If you think Iraq today is really managing its oil sector very well, and it can kind of among the well-governed countries, then I think that is not a good reflection of what's going on in that country, even though the system has been reformed maybe 2 decades ago.
Thanks for that. I want to move to Iran and President Trump with that threat on Truth Social about this massive naval vessel that's heading over there. He wants them to come to the table to talk about their nuclear facilities, which I thought President Trump said last year after his missile strikes had been, quote unquote, obliterated. So, I want to get your thoughts on that situation there with Iran and the U.S.
The situation in Iran is definitely much more worrying for global energy markets, for oil trade, but of course for the overall stability of the Middle East, because Iran is not Venezuela. It's very different dynamics. So if I just look at it from oil markets perspective, it is a much more important producer than, let's say, Venezuela. It is, despite the sanctions, it's still exporting oil and primarily to China. But more importantly, it is sitting in the region that is the largest oil exporting region in the world. And it can cause trouble to oil trade there because of the Straits of Hormuz, even though they haven't really, despite the threats over the years, they never really managed to block the straits, but they can cause trouble, they can cause disruptions. And the big question is not what will happen to Iran today, whether the Americans are going to strike or not. Actually, that creates some nervousness in the market. But what matters is what happens next. There are all sorts of scenarios, from a mild transition, perhaps, to a more established, more relaxed, more open regime, to something very, very worrying. So there is a whole range of spectrum about how things can go wrong and how they can destabilize not only oil trade, but also the geopolitical situation in the Middle East, which is a very important region from an oil trade perspective, but also for stability that can have bigger effects all around the world.
Thank you for that. It's definitely worth watching to see how things develop there. Okay, so to the U.S. now. Of course, you're aware of the winter storm that's been hitting the parts of America. I wanted to get your thoughts on how that's impacting energy prices, and also the inventory drawdown that we saw. Well, what do you make of the energy situation in the U.S. right now?
Well, I would call it a seasonal effect, so which means that we are having a temporary disruption because of the weather. It's not something structural that's going to stay with us for a long time. So the weather, for example, the cold weather and the freezing temperatures have affected operations and productions in certain areas, including in the shale areas, because it led to freezing of the water that you use to extract that shale. And that by itself constrained production. And that's why we saw also the drawdown in inventories, but also you're using more for heating and other processes in this weather. But that is not something that is going to have a lasting effect, because we have seen it before. It's a temporary disruption that is going to be finished and recovered as soon as the weather conditions improve. So this explains the situation today.
All right. Thank you for that. So my final question, I mean, I don't know if I should be asking you for an outlook, because we've just touched on so many tensions around the world. So what kind of outlook would you have for oil? How would you see things? It's only January.
I know, and I'm already exhausted because of what's happening. But really, it's just this level of uncertainty and the geopolitical developments that can happening all around the world. You had the first week of for a few days of the year, we had Venezuela. We have the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine, and now we have Iran. It feels like like a kind of movie, it's a horror movie that's unfolding gradually. We don't know what will happen next. But that by itself creates what we call geopolitical risk premium in oil markets. And that's why we saw this upward pressure on prices. However, if the geopolitical tensions ease and hopefully we move to a more de-escalation of the situation, then that geopolitical risk premium is likely to dissipate. So we're not seeing structural changes to demand and supply. It is primarily the geopolitical tensions, and that's where we are today. But if you take that away, I don't see prices changing directions drastically compared to where they were perhaps towards the end of last year.
Dr. Carole Nakhle, CEO, Crystol Energy, thank you for helping us to make sense of what's going on around the world with oil prices. We appreciate you joining us. Thank you so much.